Hey everybody, welcome to our Buyer First Ask Me Anything March edition. It has been a busy spring already for me. I don't know about all of you, but there's so much growth that I see happening everywhere that, yeah, I have to take a deep breath because I'm a little bit excited about it. But if you haven't been to our Buyer First Ask Me Anything yet, now's the time to enter in your questions below. We've had a couple of questions already sent in to us that we're going to dive into, but I would love to hear what your thoughts, what your challenges are, and what questions you have about how do we become more buyer first. And for those of you that haven't heard my spiel before, and we have up to 30 minutes today, so I want to just take a moment to share with you why this is so important to me while you're typing in your questions. See, the thing is at the highest level, according to Gartner, companies that deliver a great buying experience are the ones that are going to grow twice as fast as those that have just average experiences. Now, I'm not talking about customer experiences, what happens after someone agrees to work with you. I'm talking about the buying experience before they make the agreement to work with you. The ones that get that right grow twice as fast. And if you think about this, even at the level of the individual, the person day in and day out, I mean, we've all felt like a number before when we're dealing with salespeople, right? I know I have. Or we've all had that feeling of regretting a purchase decision that we didn't really need or did need desperately, and it just didn't work out the way that we wanted it to. Well, we're not alone. Because according to the surveys that have been done by LinkedIn, 67% of sellers say that they're buyer first, that they're committing to put a buyer's interest before their own. But only 23% of their buyers actually agree with that. And the part where you feel like a number, in the Buyer First survey report, LinkedIn also showed that active listening was the number one traits that buyers want in sellers. And in fact, there's further research that was done on this by Deb Calvert and her co-authors when they wrote the book, Stop Selling and Start Leading. And when they surveyed B2B buyers, they found that the number one thing across the board, across generations and across industries, those buyers wanted sellers who were going to collaborate with them, that were going to actively listen to them and challenge the way that they thought about their problems or their solutions. So active listening is something that buyers are demanding, but it's the last thing that managers are looking for in their sellers. The other thing is if you were to add up all of these hashtags of customer experience and customer centricity on LinkedIn, you'd see over 109,000 followers of those. But people that are actively following buyer first hashtags are less than 10% of that. This is a dynamic that we need to shift, that we need to change, because before you can have a customer, you have to have a good buyer. So let's start digging into some of the questions that we have today. And the first one that we have is one that I've been hearing a lot lately from both sellers and from managers that I've been working with. And that is, how do I differentiate my offering when there is so much competition out there? How does being buyer first help me with that? I mean, who doesn't have excellent customer service, right? Or an all-in-one solution or AI-enabled something. We've been told for I don't even know how long now that we have to sell the sizzle, not the steak. That we have to focus on the benefits and not the features of our offering. So we talk about business growth and we talk about time and cost savings and efficiencies for that. But how's that working out for us, really? Because nearly all of the sellers and managers I'm coaching right now are dealing with some version of trying to differentiate in a highly competitive market. And survey data backs this up. Some companies are reporting that up to 88% of them say that they have competition that offers similar capabilities. I mean, there really isn't all that much new under the sun that we haven't done before or seen before. Now, to find out what type of messaging really truly works best, I came across a study that was done from B2B Decision Labs. They actually tested 400 buyers on 4 different types of messaging. And when I say they tested it, like they literally put on a scan onto their heads, heart monitors, temperature, everything, like actually testing their physical and emotional reactions to this type of messaging. So first they did the test of the features messaging. This is where you list all of your capabilities that solve a particular problem or challenge for a buyer. Then they also tested benefits messaging. This is where you discuss the benefits of each of your capabilities so that buyers understand what a feature will do for them, the sizzle. Then the third type of messaging is the superlatives, right? This is where you use those terms like all-in-one or streamline or integrated. I call this corporate speak, blah, 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 blah. The last type of messaging that they tested, they called telling details. This is a very specific type of messaging around a business problem and how a capability solves that problem, and then what the value of that is. Because it's so detailed, it is a lot longer than most people are used to. But can you guess which type of messaging beat out all of the others as preferred, credible, convincing, and most likely to buy from? Okay, if you guessed telling details, then you definitely guessed right, because that is exactly what was happening. I think it was somewhere between 80 and 95% of buyers preferred that type of messaging. Why is that? First of all, when I share the messaging with you, which I will in a moment, you'll find that it's buyer focused. And they use language like "you can," and that means to frame the capabilities and how they explain them. It made it all about the buyer, not about your features and benefits. The other thing is that it was specific and it was quantifiable. So that helped to make the whole credibility factor go up. And then the last part of this messaging was that because it was both buyer focused and specific and quantifiable, 91% of buyers that they tested said it was more valuable to them. Now, in order to do this type of messaging effectively, you have to be able to ask specific questions that are going to enable you to be specific and quantifiable. That means that you have to be able to stay in the present moment to ask those kinds of questions. So what does this particular type of messaging sound like? Well, I'm going to give you the example that they gave in the study, but I want you to definitely read into how that other messaging stacked up against it. So what they said was this: when you source drivers from our onload logistics, you can fill empty seats while improving quality. Our 80,000 known driver database, you can recruit nonstop to shorten and eliminate empty seat time. On-road logistics recruiters are in constant contact with these database drivers, establishing qualifications and preferences when no jobs are open. This means that you can quickly apply for your job criteria to qualified and interested drivers who are known entities. Once you've hired them, you can onboard your drivers in days instead of weeks, because our recruiters will lead the heavily regulated process. This reduces your risk, as every onboard logistics driver has a 5-year criminal background check and a 10-year employment verification. Our unmatched geographic footprint with 300 plus locations, which is led by tenured regional managers, keep deep ties with our local driver groups, which means you can match your hiring to your demand. These kinds of specific details that are quantifiable allow buyers to have more value in the messaging. So in order for you to be able to do this, you've got to do your homework, you've got to do your research, and you have to be able to personalize this message and in with the context of what you've asked them for questions. This is how you're going to be able to differentiate when everyone else has similar capabilities. It's the trick of being able to tie the feature and the benefit to the problem and why it's important to them, using language that is based on them, not us or me or we. Don't we all over your buyers. Doesn't turn out well for anyone. All right, let's get into our next question, and let's check and see what questions that we also have coming up. Doug asks, can you elaborate more on improving the inbound marketing experience to make it easier for buyers to purchase and using social proof? Love this question, Doug. So inbound is an interesting sort of dynamic that happened over a decade ago, where people would be able to raise their hand to say, hey, I'm interested in learning more about this particular thing or this particular problem. Now, one of the things that I find that happens a lot is that when salespeople get leads that come in that someone's downloaded a white paper, or they've downloaded this, or maybe they've even looked at a pricing page, as they start to dive into pitch mode, instead of taking the time to find out exactly where the buyer is on their journey and be able to offer more value than Google can in the conversation. So first of all, when most people send an automated email after someone downloads something, it's a long email with suggestions. It says like, well, since you've downloaded this, you're probably interested in hearing about this and this and this. And here's a whole bunch of other resources for you. And the problem is that we're making a lot of assumptions at the get-go about what might be interesting to someone. Instead, what I actually coach my sellers to do, and what I also do myself, is to find out, hey, saw that you downloaded this particular thing. Did you get what you were looking for or what you expected? Or how did you come across this particular thing? Some very simple open-ended questions that are non-threatening, that are non-assumptive, to find out where might they be in their process right now. Also, the other part about using inbound to make a better buying experience is that it enables you to then go and do some research on the person who's downloaded something. Are they new to their role? Are they new to the company? Have they recently been promoted and been at the company for a long time? Who else do they report to? What are some of the things that are happening in their industry? What are some of the impacts that the current environment has had on them? What are some interesting case studies that you can then link them to, or some benchmarks information that you can give them that offers them something maybe that they don't know about the problem that they're having? See, the thing is that when you're able to put all of these points together and do an outreach or a call in a way that is relevant to them, that is focused on the things that are going on with them now, and offers some insight into something maybe that they hadn't considered about the problem that they're looking into or the solution, you're offering more value than Google can. And so that's, I think, the important part about creating a great buying experience is to, again, keep it personalized. Don't dump someone into an automated sequence the moment they raise their hand on your website, because they're going to be less likely to want to go to your website and offer their information if they're going to get spammed. And make your outreach simple and non-assumptive, and then build on that by doing your research so that you can create some value in the communication there. Thank you so much for that question, Doug. Keep the questions coming. Another question that we had come in, let's see here. So another question that we had sent in earlier this week is one that I also hear a lot. And we've heard this actually, I think, even in our last one, which is, how do I meet the activity levels that my manager is demanding and not turn my buyers off with spam? It is a question that comes up for me every week with sellers. And it's also a question that managers are struggling with as well, the competing demands of quality over quantity. Now, before, we talked about the fact that buyers are going to ignore relevant information. 90% of B2B buyers will ignore your spam, will ignore your irrelevant automated sequences. So you're really just kind of training them to ignore you. When automation is done poorly, it's just scaling crap. When most of the time, we're talking about ourselves. We're talking about our features and our benefits, thinking that this is something that they're interested in. So to meet the demands of buyers and managers who need activity level, one of the first things that I would advise you to do is to start learning how to prioritize your time. What I mean by that is focusing on your high fit, high intent accounts first. Sometimes we get into this mode of, I'm just going to load all of these accounts into this sequence so that my manager can see the activity levels and I can go and do something else. Instead, what I would recommend that you do is have high quality conversations with your best fit companies. This way, you can take your messaging and what you have learned from those conversations to put into some messaging for your sequences and your automations for maybe some of the lower fit companies, because you've talked with others like them and understood the challenges that they have, and you've been able to offer those resources that give them a new insight or a benchmark that they didn't have before. Then you know what is actually on the mind of the people that you're trying to reach before you start spamming them a whole bunch. So do the work first up front of understanding what's going on, asking those relevant questions, and offering some insights into what they didn't know before is a great way to start getting the quality down first so that you can then scale it. The other thing that I recommend for people when you prioritize your time and focus on your best fit accounts first, the next thing that I also then recommend to them is having an organized sort of matrix that you can use where you say, for example, group your accounts by industry first, and then group your accounts from industry and then down into the specific roles so that you can create custom messaging for the industry and for the role of the person, and that you can then scale that to the other contacts within that. So think of it as chunking. You're chunking your accounts by high fit, high intent. Then you're chunking them by industry. Then you're chunking it even further down by the role that they're in so that you can then develop your messaging for that so it's relevant to each particular tier. You're getting the quality as well as scaling it for quantity. Now, there's one other thing that I would have you do, and that is to make sure you have your own dashboards for what your activity levels are and what your conversion rates are. Yes, you need to have enough activity in order for you to be able to have data to be able to benchmark. But at the end of the day, you're going to burn yourself out if all you're doing is keep throwing messages out there in the hopes that something is going to stick. You're going to burn yourself out. You're going to burn your buyers out. And so having a pace in which you are every day consistently doing the activity levels instead of trying to cram it all in one day or one afternoon, instead try to give yourself blocks of like 45 minutes or 30 minutes to start with where you're doing these activities consistently. Activity levels happen not because you've done a sprint, but because you run a marathon. So that's the best way to get those levels up while also maintaining the quality of outreach that your buyers demand. All right, let's see if we have any new questions coming in. And we do have one more question in the queue for us. So our last question that we have for today that was sent in earlier, and if you haven't yet signed up on our website at Unbound Growth, where you can send in your questions ahead of time, like say something happens during the week and you just want to get that answer later on, make sure that you check out that. Now, our last question is a question that I hear a lot when we're not really entirely sure how to hire. And the question is this: what is the best way for sellers or to hire sellers who will work best with our buyers? Now, we heard the stat before about how the number one thing that buyers want from sellers is the ability to actively listen to them, but it's the last thing that managers are looking for. So let's start there. Let's start with understanding what type of characteristics and mindsets are going to be demanded by our buyers. And unfortunately, though, a lot of the hiring that happens today is very subjective. We have a certain type of person in mind, an athlete or a professional performer, someone who's competitive. We take into account the things that we think that they need to be doing in order to be good in the role, but we don't always take into account the things that our buyers need from our sellers in order for them to be successful with them. At the end of the day, the buyers are the ones that make the rule. You remember the golden rule? He who has the gold makes all of the rules. Okay, that's the new golden rule. So when we apply that to hiring, we have to understand how our buyer is going to react to our sellers, but how are they going to react in the market that they're in, on the problem that they're trying to solve that we help them with, and based on what other competition is saying to them. What is the environment that is going to be happening right now? And then based on that environment, what are some of the characteristics that we need our sellers to have to be able to work through those? So for example, is your market highly competitive? Most are. Is your buyer resistant to the idea of making a change? Most are. Is your seller trying to convince someone why they should choose you? Or is your seller trying to convince someone why they should do anything? These are just a few of the questions out of the 34 plus questions that I ask in order to create an ideal seller profile that aligns with who your buyer is. Now, before you can do that, you've got to have an idea of who your ideal buyer is and what their buying process is like and what their communication styles are in order for you to be able to then draft an ideal seller profile that will work with that, align with that, and actually go well with that together. So first step, create your ideal customer profile. Some people call these buyer personas. That's what I call them. Oh, and I have a book for you for that. It is called, and it's on the shelf here somewhere. Come on. Oh, here it is. It's the one with almost all of the sticky notes in it. So I highly recommend this book first to start with. This is called Waiting for Your Cat to Bark by Jeffrey and Brian Eisenberg. It was actually one of the first books that I read on marketing out of college, because what they talk about is how people prefer to buy online. They actually wrote this book back in the early days of Yahoo, when Amazon was first a bookstore. So highly recommend that book to start thinking about the brain science behind how people make decisions to buy. The other thing that I would also check out is B2B Decision Labs, which we mentioned earlier, who has actual neuroscience studies behind how people make their buying decisions today. But this book will help you to create a profile of the style that your buyer has so that you can then line that up to, now that we know who our buyer is, what kind of a seller do we need? So for example, if your sellers are going to be working directly with C-suite executives, they have to be able to tell a business case story. They have to be able to overcome resistance from stubborn CEOs and C-level executives who are facing a lot of risk. There are certain communication styles that they're probably going to need. But there's mindsets and skill sets and aptitudes that you can measure for to determine not only do they know what to do and can they do it, but will those sellers actually do it in the moment that they need to. So starting first with your buyer profile and then lining that up with your ideal seller profile. The other thing that I recommend for those who are hiring is to use an objective sales-specific assessment to determine whether or not those sellers that you're going to be interviewing have the actual aptitudes to be successful in the role. Because the last thing that you want is to try and fit a square peg into a round hole based off of your own subjective biases of how successful you think someone might be. This way you're using science and data to find the right fits for yourself and for your buyers. So I'm going to check 1C if we have any other questions that are coming in. Oh, we have one from Catherine. I think this is more of a comment, so thank you very much, Catherine, but she calls these revenue generating activities and she blocks the time on her calendar. So back to that question on quantity over quality, absolutely. And it's interesting that Catherine says that too. I was actually talking with one of my coaching clients earlier today, and he said, I block my time to do these things on my calendars, but for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like I actually do those activities in the time that I've blocked for. One of the reasons that I have found that this happens for me and with others is that sometimes when we block time on our calendar for something, it's almost like in our brain, we've already done the work. Like we've already blocked the time for it. So I don't need to really necessarily worry about it. And so it's like not a big deal if I just skip it today. That's kind of the challenge is we're so focused on our present that we kind of don't give much credit to the things we need to do now to affect our future. Behavioral scientists call it a present bias. We just focus on the here and now and not on the how is this going to impact us later on. So one of the ways that you can overcome this present bias, what I tell my sellers to do and my managers to do is that if you have a time block for something, say it's prospecting, for example, don't just put on your calendar time block prospecting, make it specific so that it's easy for you to take action on. I need to call this person about this particular thing with this particular message to get to this particular next step. The more specific that you make your activity in that time block, the easier it is going to be for you then to be able to actually do it. Because what happens? You put the time block down, you spend half of that time block trying to figure out what it is that you're going to do instead of actually doing the thing. So thank you so much for that, Catherine. Oh, and Janice actually just added something too. The research shows that buyers now have a preference for self-service. Is buyer first giving them what they want? Love this question. Yes and no. I hate that answer. My husband gives me that answer all the time. And I'm like, it can't be yes and no. It's one or the other. He's like, well, yes, if it's this and no, if it's that. So that's why I'm saying yes and no here. So yes, buyers do have a preference for self-service. Actually, Gartner research showed that buyers prefer a rep-free experience where they can do it themselves. Unfortunately, the research also showed in that study that when they do that is that they have a higher percentage of purchase regret. In other words, they aren't happy with the decisions that they made. There's more research out there that shows that buyers actually do want to talk with sellers when they can add value. Value being, tell me something I didn't already know about the problem I'm facing, or something that I need to know in order to make the right decision. So do we give buyers what they want? Only if what they want is going to actually give them the thing that they're ultimately going for. For example, we talk about timelines and milestones a lot in the selling process. And what happens is we have buyers who come to us and say, I need to see this implemented right away. A lot of sellers then get happy ears like, oh, there's urgency here. We should definitely move as fast as we can on this. What they then don't do, though, is they don't take a pause to control their own emotions and ask some questions to dig into that. So when you say you want this installed right away, what are you thinking that you need to see your results by? And what kind of results are you looking for? And if you need to see those results in 6 months and don't, what happens? And then you work backwards from there. So if you need to see results like that in 6 months, how long are you thinking implementation is going to take? That's where you can also share some information with them. Based on what we've done with other clients in a similar situation to you, we've actually seen the implementation time is X due to these factors. What's your plan for working through those? And you continue to not so much challenge I want it right away and I need to do this right away, but you're adding milestones and quantifiable specifics to that so that you can actually see with them collaboratively, does this make the most sense for you right now? And is it realistic that you can have that expectation right now? Sometimes buyers want things because they've made an emotional decision on something that they want, and they're trying to find some way to justify their emotional decision. And when they've already decided, it's really hard for us to convince them otherwise unless we can give them something that they didn't know before. So do we give buyers just what they want? If what they want is in line with what they need to get and how they need to get it, and they're going about it in the best possible way, then yes. But if the things that they want are actually going to cause more problems for them later on, or is going to set a bad expectation for them and they're not going to be happy, then no. It's our ethical duty to push back and challenge them or say, maybe this isn't the right solution for you, or maybe it's not the right time for you. That's hard to do when you have a quota to meet. But if you're truly putting your buyers first, that's exactly what needs to be done. Thank you so much, Janice, for that question. Love that question. And we have just a few more minutes in. If you have another question that you'd like to throw into the chat, please do so now. In the meantime, while we're doing that, I wanted to share with you our next AMA is actually going to be a little bit earlier next month, because we're going to be doing it on April 19th, which is the third Tuesday of the month. And we're going to be taking all of your questions. So as I said, if we didn't get to your question today, please make sure that you send that in so that we can get to it into our next time. Also, if you haven't yet subscribed to our blog or to our monthly newsletter, please do so as well on our website at unboundgrowth.com. There you'll find more science-based sales tips that we are going to be working on. And actually, this month's science-based sales tips, just a little hint, is going to be expounding even more on that research that I found from B2B Decision Labs on how we differentiate from our competition, because we're all apples and oranges out there. So thank you so much, everyone who's joined, for your questions. Catherine, Doug, Janice. Catch me next time, April 19th, noon Eastern time. Until then, keep learning, keep sharing out there, and together we're going to change how people view sales. Until next time. Bye, y'all.